Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. This is the garden question and answer video that I do on Sundays. You can ask gardening questions down in the comment section below the video, and that's where we pick from each week. Steph has written down 25 is what we have for this week. Thank you guys so much for participating. Without you, there's not a subscriber garden question and answer video. So keep asking away. Some of them, we try to pick ones that are fairly relevant to what's going on at that time. Holly's back here behind me. I think you can see her. I'm going to put her inside in just a minute. It's about dinner time, and she's actually been outside with us quite a bit today. Before I do that, I want to show this off. We had a subscriber paint this watercolor. Had reached out with an email and asked if they could send it to me, and of course I said yes, obviously. Thank you so much for this. But look at that watercolor of our 16-year-old Husky mix out here. It's just that's so great. I mean, you guys have sent us so many amazing things over this past year, and going back to the open garden last year and another time. So thank you for your generosity. We really do appreciate it. But this one means a whole lot, because it really does capture her completely. So thank you so much for that. It was from an Instagram photo. If you don't follow us over on Instagram, that's where you would have seen this photo. I think pretty sure that's where that was. Pretty sure that's where that was from. We just put her inside there. So we had this video announcing the native plant garden over here on the side lot a couple of weeks ago. If you've been following along with the channel, we've already planted 3 plants over there. We've wood chipped that entire area. We've got, there's a group of native plants here, literally beside the camera, on both sides of the camera. We've got some additional news over there that you guys are going to find out about this week. So I'm excited for that video. That should be tomorrow. As you're watching this, we'll have that video up on some additional news from the native plant garden, which is kind of exciting. Today is the last day for the 10% off t-shirt sale. I had extended it to March 2nd so that it could be Sunday when the sale ended. The code for getting 10% off t-shirts is here on the screen. Steph said she'll send them Monday. We were out of town for a week and a half there and missed sending a couple, but everything's out. We didn't miss sending them. They're all been sent now, but we were a little behind on sending them for a second. And the weekly garden planner is on sale for $50 off for the entire month. And so what got added to the weekly garden planner I'm super excited about this week was pruning time charts for shrubs, trees, and perennials, and I'm about to put up vines. But I not only put it on the weekly garden planner, I also put it on the Learn to Garden video series. So if you own either the Learn to Garden video series or the weekly garden planner, you now have access to pruning times. It's not how to prune anything, but it is when you would prune it. So basically, Laura Petalum's on there, says after flowering. Abelia's on there, says late winter. So on and so forth. But the perennials are on there, including some grasses. I think I did 100, so I'm missing some things on all the list, but I think there's like 86 different tree species. There were something like 86 perennial species, 120 plus shrub species. I don't know how many vines I'm up to at this point, but anyway, those things, and they're right up at the top of the page if you own the weekly garden planner. So if you're thinking about when to prune this or when to prune that, again, it doesn't tell you how to prune them necessarily, but it absolutely tells you, the optimum time to prune all of those things. So that was a super exciting addition to the weekly garden planner. And again, it's $50 off for the rest of March. And the code is on the screen right now. I've already talked about the holly painting, which is amazing. And then again, the open garden tickets are over on the website as well in the store. So let's get started on some gardening questions. So somebody said, how does transplanting change if moving from one property to another? Can plants stay in a pot in the interim, and how long? Yeah, if you're able to find a pot that's big enough for the root ball that you pull out of the ground. Sometimes the shape of the root ball is very different than containers. So here's a let's see, I'll pick something up here. Okay, here's a cephalanthus. Actually, hold on. I'm going to pick something else up. I'm gonna select this Kyananthus, this incredibly rare Kyananthus. It's grafted. This one's actually endangered in the wild. Wasn't wild collected. It was it's grafted. We'll be talking more about this plant because it's going in the native garden. But see the shape of that container where it's this tall and this big around. When you pull that thing out of the ground, it's probably going to be wider and slightly shallower. So it may be hard to match up a container to the root ball. So what I did a lot of times was you could buy some burlap and wrap them. You can get like coffee bags would be a good choice for that if you can find those, and just wrap the root balls on them to keep them moist. If you have a place, I think the best way to do this, if you can't get something back in the ground right away, is to store all the plants root ball to root ball to root ball in an area, and then pile like pine bark or mulch or some sort of mulch or leaves or something like that up around them, and just make a big root mass out of all the things that you've collected together and store them that way together. If you can't figure out a way to get them in containers. But I wouldn't cut the roots all the way down to where you can stick it in a container. That may do some additional damage to them. Is it a good time to prune Japanese maples? This is a great question because yesterday's video was pruning Japanese maples. I will say, and I pinned a comment, hopefully I remembered to pin the comment after the video goes up, it's really hard to shoot those pruning videos like that because all of those Japanese maples at the Swanson's house, we shot this video at Jim and Lynn Swanson's house. That's the second time Lynn's been on the camera. She's just a natural. And the other video, the tour video I did with her, if you haven't seen it from their gardens, amazing. I think it's called One of My Favorite Garden Tours Ever or something like that, if you want to search for it on the channel. But we filmed the pruning of the Japanese maples, and they're all in an understory there, and it's just super shadowy, and it's really hard to capture, and they leave their leaves on the ground just like we do, and so that leaves as a background to sticks, basically. It was hard to film, so hopefully you guys can get something from that Japanese maple pruning video. And this person said there still has most of its foliage. You can just pull that off. We addressed that in the video, that you can pull that foliage off if you need to get in there and actually see the structure of the plant. Let's see. You don't have to remove the leaves. The new leaves will push the old leaves off, but if you need to get in there and really see what you're looking at, my Japanese maple still has the leaves on it as well. Okay, somebody says, is Clematis armandii invasive? So I planted the Clematis armandii. It was in a video that was called 10 New Plants for the Garden or something like that a week ago. And then I put it in the video in the ground in a garden task video. They said, isn't it invasive? No, not Clematis armandii. That's the evergreen clematis over there. The sweet autumn clematis is definitely invasive. A very similar flower. So if you saw that white flower, you might confuse the two. But that Clematis armandii is spring blooming with white flowers that are slightly bigger than sweet autumn clematis. And sweet autumn clematis will throw a few spring flowers as well, but it's mostly fall blooming sweet autumn clematis. Late summer into fall blooming, and they're very fragrant. And people have planted them all over the place, but they're seeded everywhere. And there's a couple of Clematis paniculata and then Turniflora, I think, are two species that kind of get mixed up. One of them is sweet autumn clematis, and but I think I can't tell the difference between those two. When somebody has one labeled one and one labeled the other, I can't tell the difference between them. But sweet autumn clematis is the one that's pretty invasive. But again, it's also been planted so much that it's just everywhere now. So it's not going anywhere, regardless of whether you plant one or not. One of Jim's unpopular opinions. Let's see. Number 4, this person's in zone 8B, Texas. It got down to 14, 16 degrees. Their butterfly bushes look dead. Should they wait until they're awake to prune them? So basically seeing if they're alive before they go start hacking on them. Yeah, you can absolutely do that. And probably if they look kind of dead, they may be. The problem with butterfly bushes in the south, the further south you go, they're actually harder to grow, especially in nursery settings. Butterfly bushes are hardy for almost everybody watching. up to zone 5. But up there, they tend to go to sleep and stay asleep through the wintertime. And down on the Gulf Coast, they have a terrible time growing them some years because they won't go to sleep. And they stay awake, they stay awake, they stay awake. And if you actually have a couple of nights of real winter, which, you know, the entire Gulf did, including, you know, 8 inches of snow along some places in the Gulf this year, you know, you can get significant. What they do is they still have water up in the stems, and they freeze, and it cracks down at the bottom and actually kills them. It's just kind of interesting. You know, you think about it's most of the time easier to grow something in the south than it is the north, but it's flipped on butterfly bushes for sure, because the dang things just won't go to sleep and stay asleep. But yeah, if you're concerned that they're actually dead, you can wait until they start waking up, and then wherever they wake up from the base coming up, because they may still be alive somewhere in the bottom, wherever they're alive at, just cut them right above that. So no big deal. You're in 8B, Texas. That won't be long from now before you, I mean, our butterfly bush is probably a 170-degree week would be all we'd need to start seeing, because again, they're not smart enough to stay asleep, and you get to sleep and stay asleep in the wintertime. Let's see, 8B, Georgia, which they have room for one deciduous magnolia. Should they use a saucer magnolia or a star magnolia? I've got videos on royal star magnolia at the old house. I remember that video is probably 7 years ago now, and I've got several saucer magnolia videos like Jane and others. The star magnolias bloom really early here, and they do everywhere. The biggest issue with both of them is they have a tendency to bloom, and we still have a lot of cold coming, and that's amplified on star magnolias. Typically, they bloom earlier of the two. So if your concern is which one is going to expose itself most to the cold, it's probably a star magnolia. Plus, a lot of times the star magnolias are white. There are pinks, and most of them are going to be white, and white shows that damage more. So let's say it was a minor frost, you might get away with that on a darker pink or a different color flower than white, where white tends to show it a little bit more. So if you're asking because of frost, I think you're better off with a saucer magnolia, but both are equally, I'm not equally, but almost equally poorly exposed to frost and freezes about every other year. This year's been bad. I mean, they were all in the process of opening 2 weeks ago, and then we had 18, 19 degrees, something like that. Let's see, somebody has a Flipside Vitex. They planted in 2022, gone crazy. It's got a very large branch that needs pruning because it's crossing another branch. Is there a size too large to cut? This thing's like wrist size at this point in 9B, Florida. No, definitely not. You can definitely prune it out, especially, any branch. Holly's sitting here staring at me like, why do I have to come inside? Especially if something's damaging, has the potential to damage itself in time, I'd get it out of there. I don't think you're gonna hurt anything by doing that. So somebody got some Bareroot gooseberries from a box store in New Jersey, and they've broken dormancy already, but it's a long time till their frost-free date. What's the next step? So I would pot them. If you got Bareroot, we've got several, and I don't think we'll do one this year, but if you go to the channel and search Jumpstart, just the word Jumpstart, that's all you'd need. Any version of Jumpstart, you'll see all the videos we've done on all of the Bareroot things and early purchased tropical things like dahlias and elephant ears, and then all of the Bareroot things, because this time of year is a good time of year to go to garden centers and box stores and find a lot of Bareroot things that may be a little less expensive than they would be in containers later, and lots of opportunities. You'll find Liatris and as bulbs right now in boxes, and native Liatris spicata. So you can find a lot of interesting things at a reasonable price. But what to do with them between now and your average last frost date is a question. So we did all these videos over the last few years called Jumpstart videos. Basically, we potted the thing. I'd pot the thing in a 1-gallon container, and then allow it to root into that container and bring it in and out based on frost. So leave it outside on days that it's going to stay above freezing. Bring it in on nights that it's going to drop below. That's the way I would go about. You can see all that in a Jumpstart video. So got a couple questions on Clayera. Somebody has a Bronze Beauty on Clayera, and it's got a lot of leaf spot on it. It's in just morning sun, and it's close to the house. It's growing well, but should they treat it or move it? So I would probably move it. I never want to start down the road of using a fungicide on something. I mean, fungicides don't have end dates necessarily. I'm not spraying insecticides either, but if I was spraying insecticide, I might be able to wipe out the insect and then hopefully change the conditions of the plant that made it vulnerable to that in some way or another. But fungicides, I just never felt like I was actually solving a problem spraying them in the nursery. I was just preventing them for the customer, you know, to make the plant look good at retail. And, you know, I knew I wasn't in any way curing it. And so it just feels like something you're on that bus once you get on that bus of spraying fungicides. It's just going to be, so I would not spray a fungicide. I would either give the plant an opportunity to grow out of it, or in this case where it's not getting enough sun in the afternoon, maybe it's not drying off fast enough in the morning, maybe get it out to a more open space in the garden where it can dry out a little quicker in the morning and see if that helps. But Clayera do get leaf spot issues. I mean, it's not uncommon, but again, if it was in a little more open space, probably a better screening plant anyway than a foundation plant, because they do get big. So maybe giving it an opportunity in another spot. And then another person has 5 Clayera and too much shade in 8A. They're 4 to 5 feet. When to transplant them, and how far should they cut them back? So 4 to 5 foot ones, I would transplant them absolutely now. They had already root pruned them, I think, is what this question had said. They've already root pruned them, and they're about to move them. Well, so now is the time to move them for sure in the next few weeks. And then how far to cut them back? I might cut them back about 1/3. I mean, I'm not sitting here looking at them, but normally that's kind of my rule of thumb on these leafy evergreen things, is to cut them back. You can't really see this loropetalum, but this emerald snow loropetalum, if I was going to move that thing, and it has been moved, it's been abused a couple times, but I'd cut that thing back about 1/3, dig it out of the ground right now and move it without any problem. Okay, that was 8A and B. Number 9, let's see. Romanticizing a native garden as carefree easy. Viewer has one he loves, but it takes work and research. Prairie plants evolve to compete to win. So less of a question and more of a comment. And this is very true that, you know, this native garden that we're doing over here, I want to make sure that I'm also pointing out as we go that some of these things are, you know, are definitely can be aggressive in the garden. You know, they colonize, they take space, they want to win, just like this person said. It's not just prairie plants that compete to win, it's plants that grow in the woodlands, you know, that compete to win. Everything wants to own the space it's in. We've taken a lot of these Asian plants and we've, you know, selected and selected and selected for behavior that really fits our ornamental gardens quite well. We haven't made as many of those same selections on a lot of our native plants necessarily. We have with some things. I mean, like dwarf Yopon hollies are, you know, look like boxwoods basically. You know, the ones that you're going to buy. And we've seen inkberry hollies, you know, with selection over selection over selection get better over the years at not colonizing as much and not being naked down at the bottom. So we've seen. But again, a lot of these plants have, so don't go into this, we're not going into this project to paint a picture that, hey, look how easy this is, because it's not going to be. It's definitely 100% less maintenance to put in leafy evergreen Asian plants that are not invasive, non-invasive ones in the landscape and meatball them. Certainly that's less, and mulch once a year. That's a less maintenance garden than what we're going to do over there. But we're going to have some fun with that and hopefully show off some selections that are less maintenance, that some things that don't flop over and other, you know, we're just going to have fun with it. But this person is absolutely right. There's a lot of these plants that can be bullies. Let's see. So somebody has a large white oak with roots under a brick walkway. 12 feet from the trunk. Can they cut the roots? So it depends. I mean, I kind of think about how much of the diameter of the circle of the tree am I going to cut when I cut them. You're asking me if you can cut one root that's causing you some sort of problem, probably you can get away with that. If you're gonna go and cut 180 degrees, you know, halfway around, you know, the thing, that's definitely not a good idea, especially, you know, a large, oaks don't like their roots messed with. And so, you know, a lot of these oaks don't survive big construction projects. You know, if you know, there's a big white oak back here that kind of dominates this back garden off the property. You know, if we ran equipment around that thing, you know, heavy equipment for some period of time, we would do significant damage to it that would likely it would shorten its life. It's so massive that it may survive for several years, but eventually it would cut its life short for sure. So they don't like their roots messed with overall, but if you're gonna cut one root somewhere, you know, that's already having issues, that's probably okay. It's just, again, it might be a situation where you cut one, you know, cut one little section and then leave it, and in another year or two, you can, you know, get a little bit more control of it. I don't like to answer questions like that, but if I had a root that was pushing this, you know, my brand new patio up over here from this side over here, I wouldn't hesitate to cut it. I just would. But I wouldn't go all the way around the tree or halfway around the tree or even a quarter of the way around the tree doing that. Question 11, this person has a hickory. It's shady underneath. They want to add a few plants underneath it. They were thinking about sweet box and Marvel Mahonia, but generally the plants they put under it tend to diminish and die. Is it juglone? ? So black walnuts and a few other plants produce a chemical called juglone that can suppress plants that are trying to grow around them. I guess that's the purpose of this chemistry that they can create. A little bit of it is probably overblown. You know, this is how the internet is now. You know, if I say, you know, you can't grow anything under black walnut, it produces a chemical. Well, there are things that are also resistant to it. So you can Google what's resistant to this chemical and buy those plants, number one. And then number two, I also question on these things. So you have a mature tree and you're planting plants underneath a mature tree. So let's forget about this chemical for a second. All the plants that we've planted along that back line back there, if we had not given them additional water the last 3 or 4 years, they would all be dead, 100%. And it would, you know, the problem is that if you're planting around something that has mature roots, it just takes longer for things to get rooted in. We've got an Alyssium parviflorum back there, which would actually like wet feet, but can become quite drought tolerant in time. That thing wilted for 1.5 years. I was ready to move it out of there, and now I wouldn't have to think about it. And it's back there competing just fine with the roots. The Marvel Mahonia, which is on your list, that thing hit the ground and never had to water it. The Pieris I had to water and water and water. The Camellia actually was able to compete a little quicker. The Akuba was able to compete a little quicker. The rhododendrons we put back there have just, I mean, a nightmare. I'm trying to get them established next to tree roots. Carex that's back there, it's doing okay. A big leaf hydrangea, which, you know, those things can wilt if you walk past them with a glass of water and you don't give them a little of it. Cast iron plants, of course, are super drought tolerant, and the hellebores, you know, they've held up okay. So my point here is, if you're planting under an established tree, whether it is trying to kill the things underneath it or not, they're all trying to kill the things underneath them. So keep in mind, no matter what you put under there, it's going to require another extra year. So when I say water it well until it becomes, or keep an eye on it till it becomes established, you need to add a year to that if you're putting things in against established trees. So that's probably as big of an issue as anything else. And if you are concerned that it is is that issue, you can Google, you know, what plants that are tend to be resistant to it. Certainly those Mahonia are going to be on that list. Let's see. So they have a Texas redbud with an odd, gentle S curve in the trunk. Should they leave it alone or prune the leader? Well, I probably wouldn't prune the leader, but you could. I don't know how big around this thing is. For me, I'm going to live with it. I was staking trees in the 5 Minute Friday video, and I realized when I was editing the thing that I had left that Japanese maple a little bit crooked. I had left that hydrangea paniculata over there a little bit crooked. For me, it's a little bit of character, you know, to have a little bit of a bend in those things. Yeah, because again, and even the redbud that's staked right here has that curve up at the top. I just don't mind it. It actually, to me, adds a little bit of character to them. But if it's a small caliper, you can try to stake it straight, you know, up against it a little bit. You know, you can look at the staking video I did Friday and actually try to pull in, you know, put a big enough stake next to the tree and try to pull it in over a year and see if you can straighten the S out a little bit. I'm not pruning it out, or just leave it because it's unique. For me, I'd leave it because it's unique. So a lot of tree questions this week. So somebody asked if Hong Long maple is deer resistant. They want to use it in a mixed screening at some apartments, and it's high shade okay. High shade is probably fine, but it does need some direct light to keep that color in the foliage. There's one at the Ralston. It's in pretty in the Asian Valley. That's in quite a bit of shade. So, and it's got decent color on it. Ours defoliated a little more. So a couple things here. Our Hong Long maple defoliated a little more than it normally would this year because it was much colder. So it's not always going to be evergreen if you are using it as a mixed border screen. I don't know if that matters to you. It's evergreen until it met resistance, but it'll leaf back out and be fine. So is it deer resistant? So even if I told you a Japanese maple or this Hong Long maple or any maple was deer resistant, they're not resistant to being rubbed. So when we were at Jim and Lynn Swanson's house doing the pruning video, they have 250 Japanese maples, or 200 Japanese maples plus about 50 other species maples. 200 of them, 20 of those 250 are in a fence that's 7 feet tall to protect from the deer. The ones they have in the front garden, the deers rub quite a bit, so they can do damage. You will need to put some sort of fencing around them to prevent them from being damaged a different way other than eating, but keep that in mind. A couple things on that Hong Long maple. We'll show that Hong Long maple more this year. I think Mark Wethington is the person that brought that plant back. Interesting maple. When is the best or worst time to plant native grasses, i.e. carex, rush, mullygrass? So all those things aren't necessarily grasses, rush and carex, or grassy like plants and actual grasses like mullygrass. When is the best or worst time? So the best time would be as they're actively growing in the spring up through middle summer. Okay, and I'm going to talk about planting perennials this year during the summertime, because I think of all the things, you know, we talk about not necessarily planting trees in full summer or large shrubs and that kind of thing, but perennials just hit the ground running in the summertime. A lot of our herbaceous perennials, it's when they're actively rooting and actively growing, and they actually do quite well, you know, going in the ground during the summertime. So that would be my time frame. It would be from, depending on where you are, March 15th, April 15th for most people, through the middle of July, something like that. I think the worst time is as they're going dormant in the fall and they need less and less and less water. And the sky gives us more and more and more water, and you've disturbed the ground and created a pocket where more water is going to be held in place. So that combination of loose soil to grab water and to hold water, and the plant not needing the water, tends to not go as well. So spring to summer. Somebody has a decayed stump. The hole that was created from a red bud after 5 years, the stump has, weirdly, in that garden task video a couple weeks ago, I showed getting the stump out of the ground over here. I think I did, from a red bud. And it did take 4 or 5 years for that stump to break down. What's the best strategy to fill the hole? If you could, I would use soil from your own garden. So if you can fan other soil into it from around it, that is the best way to do it. If you have to bring in any soil, I wouldn't fill the whole hole with it. So I would I'd rather fan soil into it from all directions or some other place in your garden and fill most of it. And then if you have to add some soil to fill the rest of it, do that at the very top. Okay, if that makes any sense. Anytime I dig a hole out here in the process of moving a shrub, I'll fan soil into that from way outside. I'm trying to fill it with my existing soil. I don't want to create weird bowls of different soil and different horizons out here. So that's my main strategy, is to use my existing soil in my own garden if I can. And after I've exhausted that, if it's still a little low, then you could get some sort of topsoil or organic material, to finish filling the hole, cow manure and bark or something. Okay, let's see. Somebody has forsythia stems rooted to the ground. How best to harvest them to replant somewhere else? I would cut them away from the parent plant and leave them in place. So you have, your forsythia suckers it can sucker from the roots, but it can also have a stem come out down at the bottom and leaves drop on it, and they root. They root separate. They're actually rooted separate from the main plant. This Ogon, let's see. This Ogon spirea would probably do that, where one of these lowest branches along the edge that's laying flat like this, if leaves drop on that long enough, eventually this little piece is going to root in, okay, to the ground. I just cut that away from the parent plant. So if you go over there with a shovel and just literally chop it off on the plant side of the roots, so the piece came off and laid over here, and then here's the new branch. It's rooted right in here. Cut it behind where it rooted and just separate it from the parent plant, and you can leave it there for a couple weeks and then dig them out of the ground. I'll dig them out of the ground the same day and move them. So for something like forsythia, you're not gonna have any problem just popping them out of the ground, and as long as it has a few roots on it, you could put them in a container for a week or two and root them out a little more and then plant them. Or you can just go plant them. For forsythia, you can probably go plant it in the ground. Or my original strategy, which is just, if you want to be super cautious about it, you can just cut them from the parent plant and leave them in place for a few weeks and then transplant them. And then they'll be on their own for a minute because currently it's relying on the parent plant and this little bit of rooting it's done down into the ground. Okay. Does the breakdown process of wood chips keep the soil below warmer? So I don't think it's composting. There's a difference between composting. If I had the wood chips, wood chip path behind me, if the wood chips are piled this deep or deeper, then you get that composting process happening and you build up the heat in the pile. We don't really build up the heat when it's only 6 inches thick, but you have the microorganisms down there below it eating on it, and getting all the nutrients out of it and getting everything it needs, and breaking it down. Whether that creates heat, I have no idea, but not much. But it does regulate the temperature because it's on top of the soil and it's more aerated. And so air is a great insulator. So think about this 4-inch or 5-inch deep path is 4 or 5 inches of insulation I've laid on top of the soil. Think about it that way, just like the insulation in the walls of your house. So that aerated, almost like a foam board or foam piece I've laid on this path or in these beds, that air that's inside of it is going to moderate temperature. It's going to moderate heat, it's going to moderate cold, it's going to moderate moisture, it's going to moderate everything, and keep a better environment down below it for the life that's in the soil. But I don't know about the heat itself. Okay, let's see. Somebody has 6 gardenias in New Jersey with burned leaves from the cold. Will they recover, or are they a total loss? If they just have some burned leaves on them, they're fine. This time of year, it's a good idea, the plants that you're kind of nervous about. I'll pull this river birch. Oops, I just moved the camera. I just moved the camera, didn't I? Okay, this is that river birch that we got for the native garden. Beautiful specimen, actually, that Jason grew here. You know, when you look at something like this, you go, well, how do I know if it's alive, right? Well, you can go bend something right now. And if it's pliable like this, it's likely alive, okay? It's got, you know, if I bend it a little bit and it breaks, you know, it's dead, at least there. I don't know how far down in the plant that it's dead. So, but you can go out to your gardenias, and if it just has some burned leaves on the top, you can just kind of give yourself a little bit of, you know, a little bit of peace by going out and bending the limbs gently, see if they're pliable. And then secondly, you can take your thumbnail and just scratch a spot on the stem, and I see that it's green underneath this bark right here. So I know that this thing's alive all the way out to the tip of this branch. So that's a couple ways you can go out. You guys can go out and examine your plants right now that you've been worried about for, you know, the winter time, is if they're alive or not. That'll tell you a lot. If they're still pliable here in March, they're probably fine, even if they look kind of rough. So somebody has Fudding Zoo osmanthus. It actually had a gall on it, but it's 90% defoliated. Should they get a new one or wait? So our Fudding Zoo osmanthus. Fudding Zoo is an interesting osmanthus because our osmanthus fragrans, when they're in full flower, they might be slightly showy, like there's enough tiny little white flowers on it to be a little showy, but I don't consider them showy flowering plants. They're super fragrant, wonderful plants. But Fudding Zoo was selected because it just gets covered up in flowers. It's really very floriferous, and you would not mistake it for anything other than a great flowering plant. Our Fudding Zoo osmanthus, I'm not impressed with that plant. It's out here on the corner of the foundation. We left it in a container a little too long, and we let it defoliate a little bit, and now it just looks bad. And so I've had it planted in the ground now for a year, and it did nothing. I'm gonna give it this spring, and this is what I would say to you. I'm gonna give mine this spring, giving it the benefit of the doubt that it's finally rooted into the ground. But by June, there's gonna be something else planted in that spot if that thing is not flushing out and looking like something. But I have not been impressed with the plant itself. I'm impressed with them in containers when I see them in full flower, but I've not been impressed with one in the ground. Okay. Okay, so somebody wants to start growing fruit and berries. What is the best resource for information? I've said this a lot of times, and this is, I say this in the weekly garden planner too on fruit and nut stuff, and berries. You definitely want to check with your local extension office. Everywhere is different, okay? And there's a reason that when you drive through the Columbia River Valley, that all of the apples are on the Washington side of that river, okay? There's a reason that all the peaches are in a select area in South Carolina, Georgia, and North Carolina. Not all. There's a reason that there's apples up in the North Carolina mountains. There's a reason there's apples up in northern New York, and other things. And so you'll notice as you drive, spend any time crossing the country back and forth, you'll notice very particular areas. You know, you go to really far south Georgia, right on that Florida border, and you'll see pecans everywhere. And then you go out to Arizona and you see a pocket of them out in Arizona. There's a reason they're growing them in these particular places. These plants are flowering plants. A lot of them tend to flower very early, and then they get damaged by late frost. And so a lot of the country struggles with late frost, and so you can't produce fruit well in those areas, or consistently well in those areas. So trust me when I say the peaches and the apples and the cherries and everything else got tried everywhere in the United States. And what we settled on were the areas where they're farmed. There's a reason for that. And it's because they get more consistent year over year, less damage from late frost. You know, possibly other issues too about staying cool, possibly a cooler little pocket where it's not as hot during the summer. And there's probably some other reasons too, but a lot of it has to do with late frost and freezes. So, but your local extension office will be able to lead you in the direction of what are the best things for the little pocket that we live in. There's certainly something that will grow well there. For me in this garden, we can grow pomegranates. Got a pomegranate over here, got another pomegranate right here. Believe it or not, brought another pomegranate home from Florida the other day. It's just leafing out right there. Got to protect it for the next couple of weeks before we get so it doesn't get a late frost on that new foliage, because I brought it from Florida. And we're growing, obviously our vegetable garden is a lot, and we're growing blueberries. We have, I don't have a fig currently, but we can grow figs. So there's something you can grow, is my point. But apples and cherries and some other things really struggle here. So I'm not going to invest that kind of money and time. Long answer to what is the best resource. Check with your local extension office, and they will be able to lead you in the right direction, or your state, your main ag school for the state. So for us in North Carolina, that's North Carolina State University, which is 4 blocks down the road. And they have they've tried everything here. Let's see. This person's in North Texas. They have a flamethrower redbud. How far from the plant can it be planted? They think theirs is too close to the foundation. Internet has mixed info. What would the creator or breeder say? Well, Denny Werner's, when we shot that video at his house, his was up against the foundation, but it was probably, I'm gonna say 6 to 8 feet from the foundation, and that probably gave it enough room, but it is more of a spreading one. Flamethrower is definitely a spreading, arching one, maybe to its own demise a bit, because you know, it's hard for branches to be like this, you know, and hold up in snows and storms and, you know, ice, that kind of thing, and kind of wispy, fast growth. So it does get wide. So I would say 6 to 8 feet from the foundation. If it's closer than that, you might be able to sculpt, you know, one side of it. But Denny's was on the foundation. But again, he's a fairly big lot, so his was 6 or 8 feet off when that's where the video for the Flamethrower Redbud was shot, was at Denny's house, the breeder for the tree. Let's see, number 22, this person's in Michigan, 8-foot tall butterfly bush. They've never pruned it, but now it's scruffy and needs it, and it needs it just because they'll fall apart at some point. If you let a butterfly bush just go forever and never prune it down, it's on a time clock where someday it's going to split open from something in the future. How far can they cut it to the ground? Since it's never been pruned back, you know, I probably wouldn't go any more than I'd leave it about 2 feet in height when you prune it. But we prune all of these. I think they've all been pruned now. All the dwarf ones have been pruned. One has been removed. The large one out by the street, which was 12 feet tall, it gets 12 feet tall every year. I cut it down to 2 feet, it goes back to 12 feet. So that's how much growth in a season they can get. Somebody asked the best ways to eliminate blackberries. So I just was cutting these back over here and I buried them in wood chips. You know, you can cut them to the ground and then bury them in cardboard boxes or wood chips, or you know, dig them out. You know, you can obviously spray them, but typically they're going to be amongst other things, and you're probably not going to be able to spray them as easily. But I won't have any problem pushing those blackberries back. I'm going to tell you that the answer, unfortunately, to every question, and I could pick one of these questions every week. What is the best way to get rid of ivy? What is the best way to get rid of blackberries? Doesn't matter what the question is start. You know, start cutting, go out there and cut them to the ground. Deny them light. That's the main way to kill all of that stuff, is deny it light. So go take that English ivy and cut it to the ground. If you can mow it, and start burying it in stuff and deny it light. So that's the case with blackberries and vines and Chinese privet and anything else you can think of. Cut it to the ground and bury it. And if you can dig the stump out, obviously better. But if you can't, just start. I mean, you're losing ground every day to that thing. So go start on it. Go push it back further today than it pushes you back the other direction. And if you do that every day, you will win. So I jumped into this area over here at the back. You guys saw the videos. I didn't spend more than an hour back there, but I was quite serious about winning. and I'm gonna spend a few more hours back there winning this spring, and I will win that battle. But it's gonna take a minute. I cut down Chinese privet to the ground. They're gonna obviously come back up from the roots because I haven't dug the stumps out yet. I may have to bring a truck back over there and pull them out. whatever. I'm just saying, start the battle. Cut them to the ground and bury them as my initial response. And then from there, if they dare poke their heads up, chop them off again or spray them or whatever. But jump on it. Number 24. Somebody has a willow oak. It's 2 years old. It's already 12 to 15 feet, but it has smaller leaves and it's off color. The soil is slightly acid, clay soil. They got plenty of iron. They think maybe it's not taking up the iron and that's what's making it off colored. Advice for amending at this stage. So, you know, just off-color yellow leaves does not mean iron deficiency. Typically, what you'd see in iron deficiency, you know, and I'll pull a leaf off here of this Persea. What we typically see in an iron deficiency is kind of the yellowing that we're seeing in this leaf, where we can see the mid vein of the leaf and we can see these other veins running, and we have yellow between the mid veins. That's typically what an iron deficiency looks like. But if the whole leaf is kind of off-colored yellow, that's probably more just a general, it could be a phosphorus deficiency. It's a deficiency of some kind caused by some, you know, it could be planted too deep. It could be, I'm completely guessing on these things, okay? But if I have one, so first of all, something like a willow oak, oaks are notoriously hard to root. There are a couple places in this country, and I've been to a couple that root oaks, okay? But you know, white oaks, red oaks, willow oaks, where they can create clones. So if I have a beautiful willow oak, I can take cuttings off of it and I can create one that's very similar to that parent plant. Really hard to root. And again, you know, this is like just a handful of nurseries in the entire country that even attempt it. So mostly what we see when we're buying oaks is going to be seedlings. And so within seedling selection, we could get a lot of variability. We're not going to get clones. Like with this emerald snow loropetalum back here, when that plant was originally found, since then they're all clones, because I just take a cutting off of it and I root that cutting, okay? And now I have another emerald snow loropetalum. Well, it's a clone of that one. So I kind of know that it's going to grow like that one. And it's going to be well behaved like that one. It's going to have dark green leaves like that one. It's going to have white flowers like that one. But in those oaks, there's going to be so it could be seedling variability, could be a difference in the place where you have it planted. It could be, again, too deep. And there's other, you know, I'm sure lots of other reasons. If I sat here and ran my mouth long enough, I could think of. If it continues to be an issue, I mean, it might be that you try to go down and see if you can find the root flare on it. You should be able to see right before a tree goes into the ground, you should see it broaden out, okay? If you can't see that root flare, it may be planted too deep, and that may be preventing it from being able to process some sort of nutrient, having soil up on the collar of it. But even my palm here, right down at the base of it, I can see it slightly broader before it goes. And this is not even a tree. This is, you know, but you can see it on every shrub that I have and every tree that's out here in the garden. And hopefully even in container plants that are about to go in the ground, you can see it slightly wider before, that's the root crown. If you can't see that, and that's true with any tree in your garden, everybody watching, you can probably go out now and find that there's a few trees in your garden that are too deep, that were planted too deep. It may not have been you, may not even have been the landscaper that put it in. It may have been the nursery that bought it from another nursery and repotted it. At some point it got planted too deep. So that may be an issue as well. So it gave you too many reasons. Let's see. So number 25, this person has 2 camellias under a 40-foot pine. One is happy in flowers. The other one's kind of yellow with no flowers. Is it a nutrient deficiency, iron, what to do? So another iron question here. Again, the yellowing would show up a very particular way if it was iron related. But the clue here is that you've got 2 growing under the same tree, and one is doing poorly and one is doing well. That kind of tells me that it's probably not an iron deficiency or any kind of, there's not really difference between the soil from you know, from here to here, from, you know, 5 feet apart or 8 feet apart or whatever they are. So for me, I'm thinking that that one is poorly planted. I don't want to say poorly planted, you know, it was misplanted at some point. And then, you know, it's too deep, or it's drier in that spot. Maybe there's more roots from the tree in that spot. Could be several reasons like that. So for me, if I have a plant that's underperforming after it's been in the ground for a couple years like that, I dig it up and I can replant it back in the same spot, maybe amend the soil a bit and raise it a bit, or move it to a different place in your garden to try to make it happy. But if you find that something's been in the ground for 2 or 3 years and it just won't ever get started, or I'm continuing to have to water it, it's fighting against me, it's slightly off color from what it should be, replant it. Move it to another location or replant it directly in the same spot it's already in, and can think about raising it up a bit when you do. That can be helpful. So thank you guys so much. Again, the weekly garden planner got a major addition this week of pruning timings. So this is just a list. It's a basic list in alphabetical order by botanic name. And so you can look up Abelia or Pittosporum or Ilex, which is holly, or Mahonia or Distilium or whatever, Viburnum, and go, you know, look it up in that list and it'll say late spring, early fall, you know, whatever, or late spring or early fall, or after flowering or whatever. It's really a really basic chart, but it is a very, between the 3 that I've put up so far, there are about 300 plants on there. And I think it's a pretty good piece of information. If you're just like, when should I prune this? You can be able to refer to that on the weekly garden planner forever if you own it. Thanks again to Chris for sending this amazing watercolor of holly, and thank you guys for participating. Ask questions in the comment section below, and we'll be back next week. Thanks for watching.